First, I would like to thank everyone for joining us for the virtual tour this evening. For those of you who don't already know, Green Homes is a 100% volunteer-run organization that focuses on promoting energy efficiency and a sustainable urban built environment. Um, the organization is run by four working teams. So we have the monthly forums team where they introduce different topics regarding sustainable practices or new developments happening in the industry. And those forums are held once every month. Another group is Green Careers, where they focus on mentorship for those interested in transitioning into the sustainability industry or provide guidance for people that are new to the sustainability industry. The third one, Green Building Tours. This one we focus on providing, usually it's in person and at either a facility or building, but providing people with firsthand experience on new innovative designs or ideas happening. And lastly, communications teams, which helps with all the marketing and all the back end things that make this organization possible. Um, and so for those interested, you can definitely sign up to volunteer. You can be either a volunteer that commits casually and help us check people in or write recaps, or you can be a more involved volunteer where you can join one of the groups that I mentioned previously and help with planning and other things that we might need. And some of the perks of being a volunteer are listed here, such as attending all events free. You're able to network and communicate and work with other people outside of maybe your specific industry knowledge. And so now, without further ado, I'll have Sandra introduce herself and give you all an overview of what we can expect on this tour.
Thank you, Kistana, and thank you so much to Green Home for inviting me here. It's very exciting. And I'm so impressed that this group is volunteer run. It feels like a Fortune 500 company, not a volunteer group. So it's really a pleasure. So I am here. I'm going to share. My name is Sandra Goldmark. I'm an associate professor of professional practice at Barnard College. My original field is theatrical design, believe it or not, but I have transitioned to working on basically on the circular economy. And I serve as the Director of Sustainability and Climate Action for Barnard as well. So that kind of strange professional journey is actually part of the story that is gonna, that shapes what I'm gonna share with you tonight. So I'm gonna share my slides. So you know a little bit now about who I am and why I'm here, but the real reason that I'm here is because, as I like to say, shit is broken. Our massive global system of consumption is broken. Our individual relationship with our stuff is broken. These two combined problems are fueling climate change. And in each of our homes, a few things are broken. I'm also here because while I do think that stuff is really broken, I also believe that we can fix it, that we have the tools to build a more equitable and sustainable pattern of consumption, that we can live in a way that feels good and accords with our values, and that we can quite literally fix some things. So first, before I get into the story, how do I move forward here on my slides? There we go. I wanted to just give you a little overview of what we're going to do tonight. So first, with my slides sitting here, I'm going to tell you, I've just written a book called Fixation, and I'm going to tell you a little bit the story behind that book of how we got here and why I'm here tonight. And then, in the spirit of everybody sitting around on Zoom all day and being in a million meetings, I'm going to try to talk through some of the themes in the book, but get up and walk around and give an unvarnished tour of my apartment and use a series of objects in my home to illustrate the concepts in this book. So I'm going to ask you to be kind and generous and not judge my apartment or any of the mess you might see. And hopefully you can relate. I'm not going to show you all the really messy bits anyway. But so that's what we're going to do tonight. These are the concepts that I'm going to hit on. I'm not going to tell you yet which objects I'm going to use to illustrate each concept, but this is sort of the backbone, the spine of the book. It's a path forward for how we can have stuff without breaking the planet. Have good stuff, not too much, mostly reclaimed, care for it, pass it on. But to rewind a little bit, I wanted to share with you the beginning of this story, which actually starts about 7 years ago now in 2013, when I was home on maternity leave with my second son, and a bunch of stuff broke in my house. A toaster, a vacuum, a lamp, my backpack, just like a, kind of a little tsunami of broken things, but nothing extraordinary. But perhaps because I was on maternity leave and feeling a little sleep-addled and maybe a little crazy myself, I got really stubborn about it. And I didn't want to order a new vacuum or a new toaster. I wanted the old one to work. And I started thinking, this is crazy. Why can't I get my vacuum fixed? I remember calling the manufacturer and they suggested that I drive to Hackensack, New Jersey to get the vacuum fixed. And I thought, I have a newborn, I have a toddler. I am not driving to Hackensack, New Jersey. There has to be a better way. This is crazy. And so I, very logically, I also knew, I told you that I came from theater. I also knew that it's possible to fix these things. Right? That in theater, if we really, really needed that vacuum to go on stage, or we really needed that backpack to go on stage, we would fix it. I knew that it was technically possible to fix a bunch of things. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to do it in the real world. So again, reminder, sleep-addled, sleep-deprived. I thought very logically, the next step in this journey is to write a letter to Walmart and to convince them that they need to open a repair shop in the corner of every single Walmart around the world. And I had my letter all written literally on the desktop of my computer, and I showed it to my husband, Michael, who you'll probably meet later tonight. And I said, all right, I'm going to send this. What do you think? Any typos? And he said, well, it's great, but do you think that Walmart is going to read your letter? And I thought, well, why not? I have such a good point. And he said, well, do you think they're going to revise their entire core business model because a sleep-addled set designer in New York doesn't want to buy a new vacuum? And I thought, well, they should. But I listened to him and I thought, all right, let's slow down a little bit. And Michael said, maybe you don't have any data. You're just like telling them what to do. And I said, all right, let's get some data. So long story short, Michael and I and a bunch of theater colleagues got together and we opened our very first little repair shop here in Inwood in northern Manhattan. We got an empty storefront from this awesome local businessman who rented it so really cheap, and we made a little sign. We made little marketing videos like this one, and we opened our doors. We were not sure if we would be able to fix anything. We were not sure if anybody would show up. We were definitely not sure if Walmart would pay attention, but we went for it. We were theater kids and we thought, let's play repair shop. So we started playing, and let me go advance the slide. Oh, how do I do that? So we started fixing things. We got a bunch of colleagues together and we started fixing everything that walked in the door. Interestingly enough, we by accident were sort of playing with the business model of repair and disrupting things, if you like that word, in our little way. We had very low rent, and later as we went on to do our pop-ups, we began experimenting with this concept of how to be mobile, essentially how to not have a brick and mortar storefront. We were at farmers markets, we were within other businesses. Everybody always wanted us to get a truck, we never did it. We were, historically repair is specialized, right? You go to the jeweler, you go to the cobbler, you go to the appliance guy if you can find him still. We brought all the fixers together in one place. It was kind of like a backstage theater, right? Where you've got a costume person, an electrician, a carpenter. So we brought all the skills. For the customer, what that did was it created a one-stop drop-off. So it lowered the barrier, right? For me, I couldn't bring my vacuum, my lamp, my backpack to 3 different places with a newborn, but maybe one place I could do it. So we were experimenting with this model. Over the years, we ran, for 7 years, about 2 to 3 pop-up shops per year and dozens of educational events. We worked with amazing partners like GrowNYC and Patagonia and local businesses. We fixed over 2,500 objects, all kinds of stuff, lamps, appliances, furniture, jewelry, ceramics, a polyester therapy tunnel, which still to this day, we don't really know what it was, but we fixed it. And we had an 85% success rate. So we were able to fix 85% of the items that we took in. We even managed to turn a small profit, even in our crazy little high overhead model where we were opening and closing twice a year. And we weren't paying ourselves enough, but it was very interesting because this argument of, hey, Walmart, hey, big business, maybe we need to build repair and service back into our business models. We were actually beginning to prove that it might actually be possible. People have dismissed it out of hand, but I'm not so sure. We diverted at least 10,000 pounds of waste in terms of the actual objects that didn't go to landfill. And if you look at the emissions and waste from manufacturing that was averted from not having to buy new items, that was about 40 to 60 times as much waste averted upstream. And this is a really important one because this part of consumption is something that I think, and climate change is something that needs to be said, which is that these patterns of consumption are impactful and a big part of the larger conversation. The IPCC has shown that 45% of greenhouse gas emissions can be traced basically to food and stuff. And the Journal of Industrial Ecology says that 50 to 80% of land and material impacts, again, come from consumption. So this is a big deal, thinking about consuming. We're already there in some ways in terms of food culturally, but we have a ways to go in terms of stuff.
Bill payment. ¿Qué quieres pagar tu bill?
Quiero pagar el mortgage.
Ahí,
Creo que
ahí ves bill pay.
So we realized that we hit a nerve in many ways, that there were press were kind of really interested in our kooky little shops. More importantly, we realized we hit a nerve from talking with our customers. We realized that, yes, there's all of these kind of data points and scientific and environmental impacts and reasons why we need to look at consumption. But when we talk to our customers, we realized that people were not happy with this system either. They were deeply dissatisfied with a whole lot of things surrounding their stuff. And we realized this not just from fixing things, but from talking with them when they brought the objects in. We started calling it stuff therapy because they would come in and put their object on the table and start talking. And they would tell us where it came from and who gave it to them and where it fit in their apartment and why it was important in their life and how they had tried to fix it and it didn't work. And it was this really interesting conversation that for me made me realize there was a lot more to this weird hobby that we had adopted over the years than just thinking about repair or even just about consumption and climate change. I started realizing that, and again, this went back to my roots in the theater, that we create meaning with the objects around us, right? As a set designer, I would put objects on stage to help tell a story. And I realized that all of us in our homes, we're trying to tell a little story of who we are. We're sort of performing our identity every day. And part of it is the props and the scenery. So when I started thinking about these repair shops from that angle as a lens into this much bigger question of stuff, I started realizing that I wanted to talk about that complexity and help people not just fix their singular lamp or toaster, but help think through a way forward where we could do this better more broadly. So that, all of that thinking and all of that story and all of those broken objects, even the old polyester therapy tunnel, found their way into this book called Fixation. So the book is a call for a holistic overhaul of how we think about consumption and stuff. I'm leaning heavily in this book, and I want to cite this because, as you saw these steps, on Michael Pollan's work, because I think that food and stuff is just like food, right? We take it from the earth, we transform it with our labor, and we bring it into our bodies or our homes. Bodies for food and homes for stuff. And so the food movement is really well advanced. It's not like we've got it totally figured out, but we have made significant progress in helping people understand that the food they consume impacts their health, their happiness, the community where their food is grown, and the planet. And I think we can borrow from the food movement as we launch, hopefully, this stuff movement, which I think is actually already starting. It's still in its infancy, but it is happening. So, so I'm leaning on the food movement to call essentially for a stuff movement to outline for people what a circular economy looks like, what an economy based on care looks like, and how we can actually live it as individuals and as businesses and as policymakers. And a lot of the themes in the book is this idea that these things are very familiar. A lot of these things are practices that have existed for thousands of years, and we need to actually bring them back into the forefront and put value on them again. So, okay, these are, oh good, we're right on time, amazing. These are the steps. The book is divided into parts, and these are my steps forward, lovingly and respectfully borrowed from Michael Pollan, who said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, right? He was saying, let's get rid of all these crazy fad diets. Let's get rid of all the complication. How can we boil down this incredibly complex issue of food into a path forward? So I think it's the same. Stuff is a really big, complex issue, but we can also think about these steps as easy ways forward. So now, this is the exciting moment of the evening of the program, where I'm going to try to join this meeting from my phone and walk around my apartment and illustrate each of these steps using a couple of objects. So now the host is going to let me in. Oh my God. Okay. Can you guys hear me now when I talk into my phone? All right. I'm going to put on my headphones so that I don't irritate my whole family. Though in COVID, really, isn't that all we do? Still working? You can still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sandra.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop the slides because I don't know, we don't need that, right? So hopefully now you see my face. And, oh, I don't know how to turn my camera around on Zoom. I'll just have to, does anyone know how to do that on a Zoom meeting? How to like turn your camera phone around? Then I'm just gonna have to like show you the old school way, right? Okay, so I don't actually have to stand up yet. So the first concept is have good stuff, right? This is when you're thinking about what should you buy? The first part of it is thinking that buying something new should ideally be extremely rare, right? When you do buy something new, it should be good. So what does good mean? It means that it's sustainably sourced and ethically made. Let me turn off this video so you don't have two confusing images of me. Great. Okay, so something that is good is sustainably sourced and ethically made. It's well designed for longevity and repair, and it's made of good materials. So now, just so you know, not every object that I'm going to show you tonight illustrates these concepts in the positive. Some of them illustrate them in the negative, if you know what I mean. And the first category of stuff in the home that I wanted to talk about today is, in fact, computers, tech. And I think you can all relate, cords. Ooh, Anthony, thank you. Tap the screen and I'll see an arrow to spin and reverse the camera. I know, but I'm not, I am seeing it. Thank you, Anthony, you rock. Okay, great, that's gonna make life much easier. Okay, so I wanted to talk about tech and computers as we're talking about what is good stuff and what is not good stuff, because tech and computers is really a huge category of stuff. In our homes, especially in COVID, we're all drowning in it. We're all using tech and gadgets all the time. And these devices have a huge impact. In 2019, there were 1.4 billion active Apple devices worldwide, which I think is just mind-boggling. In 2017, I'm picking on Apple because I use, as you can see, I have an iPhone and I have their MacBook. So as a customer, I feel like I should educate myself. So in 2017, Apple reported 27.5 million metric tons of carbon emissions, which is equal to the emissions from 5.9 million cars on the road in 1 year. And 77% of those emissions come from manufacturing. In addition to emissions, electronics are tied to a lot of human rights abuses, ranging from poor working conditions to e-waste dumping. Globally, e-waste is only recycled at a kind of dismal rate of 12% per year. So this is to give you some of the problem context of tech and gadgets. And I want to talk a little more about some of these challenges or problems and also some of the opportunities. So as we're talking about Apple, Apple as a company goes is kind of like the king of design, I would say. They are famed. They have transformed the world of design of electronics and gadgets and technology, right? But I think when you start thinking about it a little more deeply, you can start to question what really makes a design great, right? You can't really talk about devices today without talking about this concept of obsolescence. So obsolescence, for many of you probably know, but it was a term that was really first popularized or coined in the 30s, most famously by Barnard, who talked about planned obsolescence, but actually a little bit earlier, also championed by a woman named Christine Frederick, who outlined what she called progressive obsolescence. So London's concept of obsolescence was actually for the government to recall objects and say, bring them back, we're gonna sort of throw them away and make new ones. This was to a plan to get out of the Depression. Frederick's plan was also for exiting the Depression, but was more about building in the perception of obsolescence. She called it progressive obsolescence. So, in later years, in the 50s, it might be, oh, my white refrigerator is looking so boring. Maybe I should get an avocado green one. And today it might say, I need the latest iPhone. There's other different kinds of obsolescence. There's a great book called Made to Break, which I highly recommend in terms of the different ways you can build obsolescence into a product. In some ways, you can physically see that So obsolescence is essentially a way to design the waste right into the product by giving it an artificially limited lifespan. And in certain ways, you can actually physically as well see the waste designed into the object itself. One great example is proprietary screws. So if you can't open an object because the screw heads are not Phillips head, they're like unrecognizable, and maybe you don't have the screwdriver, that might be a sign that your object is going to be harder to fix, harder to get into, harder to maintain. There's a company called iFixit, speaking of Apple, that has repairability guides. So while I'm introducing you to these specific objects, I think Adrian's putting the same thing in the chat. My phone is a 7 out of 10 in repairability, not bad. My MacBook Pro, which I looked up for this tour, I'm not sure which kind of MacBook Pro I have, to be perfectly honest, and it's a huge range. There's a 9 out of 10 repairability score for some of them, but a 1 out of 10 for others. So iFixit has done a huge amount of amazing work, and they give 3 out of 10 for iPads. Anyway, so they've done a huge amount of work to help us begin to understand some of our tech and what is how it's designed and how the design is impacting whether or not it is in fact good stuff, i.e. designed for longevity. So I think the theme here, the takeaways as we begin to look for products and design products, to think about not just how it looks, not just the slickness, but how we design the upgradability and the service into it from the beginning. So you can green your operations as much as you want, but if your product itself is locked into a system of waste, you're never going to get there. So for example, when I buy this phone, I bought it refurbished. I would check the iFixit repairability guides. especially if I didn't. As soon as Fairphone, I don't know how many of you have heard of Fairphone, but it's a phone that is modular. It's the materials in it are certified and sustainably sourced, and it is modular. So if you need the new camera, you can just get the new camera. You don't have to replace your whole phone. So those are some ways that I've been thinking about electronics. I started with kind of one of the most complicated issues, but now we are going to go to a different area, totally different type of object, and look at the couch. So I wanted to talk about the couch because I felt often in my repair shops that we talked a lot about, I'm gonna sit on the couch. People talked a lot about appliances and gadgets and tech, but I wanted to point out, especially when you're thinking about good stuff, that you can apply these concepts to anything that you might buy. So thinking about good stuff means thinking about what are the materials in it, where is it sourced, who made it, how long will it last, how durable is it. If this is not always easy, right? There are some certifications. So Fair Trade USA, for example, Green Guard, you can look for FSC certified lumber. It's not comprehensive, and there's many objects that you won't be able to figure out what it's made of. But if you can find some of those certifications, especially for me, important when I got this couch was having to do with the toxins. A lot of things like couches and rugs and more textile-based things in the home have some really disgusting toxins in them. So if I buy a new couch, I would look for all those certifications. Of course, I would buy a used one first and spend this money I saved reupholstering it, but we'll get to that when we get to step 4 of mostly reclaimed. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, step 2, not too much. So we are going horror of horrors into the kids' room because I wanted to acknowledge that even post Marie Kondo, this is, talk about unvarnished, post Marie Kondo, clutter exists. Everybody has clutter. Ugh, someday they're going to clean up. Oh, such a COVID moment. They're both on their computers. So I think the conversation about clutter is really important, right? As Michael Pollan pointed out, we're in a unique position today in Western society of having too much, right? Where the surfeit of empty food calories and the surfeit of empty stuff calories are impacting our waistlines, our homes, apparently our children's floors, and of course the planet. So it's a strange sort of problem, probably new in human history for most people. And it's something that in many ways has captured our imagination. You know, we're fascinated in a weird way with the excess and the sort of big emotions that come with it. If you look at things like haul and unboxing videos on YouTube, or aspirational home makeover shows, or the, you know, schadenfreude of shows like Hoarders, we are wrestling with this question of excess, of how to deal with it. I think that there are a lot of fad solutions, kind of the equivalent of a fad diet, and they may work for you or they may not. You know, if you're a minimalist, great, minimalism might serve you and be a way forward. But I think that one of the things in Fixation that I'm looking for and to help people is to find a more holistic approach that feels like where you can make positive choices and it becomes easier to have a healthy relationship, again, much like food. So I'm going to turn. Again, we're going to go on to step 4. Step 4 is mostly reclaimed. And for this one, oh my God, I can't believe I'm showing you guys this. We're going to look in my closet. First, I will talk a little bit about reclaimed and why it's so important. and then we'll look in there. It's reasonably clean today. So buying used instead of new is point blank one of the most impactful to decrease your impact from consumption in terms of your home and your personal habits. So it's a big one. It's a really big one, and it's something we can all do. And I spent a lot of time in Fixation talking about how we can turn up the dial on that. So let me pick an object. Let's pick a shirt. Here, this is, I got this used. Not very beautiful shirt, but the estimated emissions saved from buying one used instead of one is equivalent, which amounts to the carbon absorbed by 127 trees in one day. So it's not insignificant, but it's still relatively small potatoes for one shirt. However, if you consider all the shirts purchased in America in 1 year, which is somewhere around 880 million garments, we're looking at a potential savings that exceeds 2.2 million tons of carbon annually in shirts alone. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying that so that I tried Fixation about the reality of buying used and what's hard about it and how we can make it easier for some people. So one thing is the ick factor, right? People like used clothes. Many people don't. Some people like housewares. For the categories that people are uncomfortable with, they usually have people can to dial something comfortable long. So you can
you were cutting out a little bit. Can you repeat the last
kids'
sentence?
toys and strollers, then do your own clothing. Let me go back a little. Is it better here when I'm next to the router?
That's better.
It's better here? Okay, thanks. I'll try to stay here. We've got a little bit close to the router. So the goal is to think about where you buy used and where you're buying new, and think about all the categories of stuff and turn up the volume in each of the categories. So if you already buy lots of used clothes, great. Can you do even more? Can you move into shoes? For example, for me, shoes was a hard bridge to cross, but I started finding ways and places to do it. Can you do kid stuff? Can you do electronics used? Can you do furniture used? And we'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the systems and businesses that are starting to make this easier. But from a personal point of view, I really think it's actually can be a conscious process to sort of set some targets and think very carefully about the proportion of new versus used that you buy. And this is already happening. This is one of the most exciting things. I think someone may have just posted this in the chat, but resale is growing 21 times faster than traditional retail right now. So basically, this is to say we can all get on board as individuals and as businesses, right? That finding the value in reuse and starting to think about it as something that we can consciously do and consciously facilitate and make easier for people, so that it's so that getting that shirt should become as easy as getting the used shirt. Yes, buy nothing groups. There are so many different ways to bring more reuse into your life, and I think that ecosystem is a key part of it. The other interesting thing that I want to mention, again on the personal side about reuse, is that I want to acknowledge that having stuff is enjoyable and can and should be enjoyable. Again, just like food, it's a blessing, it's a joy, and there's no crime in like wanting a new shirt once in a while. So buying used is a great way to get something new to you and not feel guilty about it, not feel like it's going to have a huge negative impact. So there's a kind of selfish personal side to buying used that I think is really important. So the next step is care for it, right? Have good stuff, not too much, mostly reclaimed, care for it. In terms of care, I'm going to take you into the kitchen. This is Michael. Hi, Michael. He's cooking tonight. Yay. And rather than enjoying a nice view of Michael, we are going to talk about my toaster. Oops. How's the signal in here? Can you guys hear me?
Yep, it's good.
Okay. This is not a very interesting or spectacular toaster, but I wanted to talk about it as we talk about repair, to share with you that for all of the objects we had in our shop, we had an 85% success rate. However, for appliances like this toaster and blenders and audio and all that kind of stuff, our success rate was only 65%. We had a much lower rate. Of those appliance fails, at least 16% were because parts were unavailable. I do want to give a little shout out to KitchenAid, which for their blenders, we had a 78% success rate, not for their toasters, but for their blenders. So the question for me that this toaster asks, and I'll show you my nice toaster again, is how do we get the rates up for all of these items, everything you've seen in the home so far, but especially the appliances. This gets into bigger conversations again about design, but also policy. Like how can we incentivize repair? Sweden a couple years ago passed a tax credit to incentivize repair services. France recently, in January 2021, they're going to institute that products have to have a repairability score or posted on items. This is a totally amazing, amazing movement I'm so excited about. And there's another part of this concept of how we can get repair to be a more robust part of how we live and how we do business that has to do with what I like to call the ecosystem of repair. So many of you may have heard of repair cafes, which are free, usually one-day volunteer events where you bring your toaster and you sit down and you learn to fix it, or you fix it with an expert. We had our shops, which were a kind of funky model of like a small independent repair provider. There's DIY. And the piece of this puzzle that's missing really, especially when you're thinking about things like toasters, has to do with big business. And what is going to be interesting is to see how repair begins to move up the ecosystem, up the food chain, as it were, to some of those bigger players, and when they begin to incorporate repair into their business models. Reuse is taking off much faster, as we saw, than repair is. I think repair is more complicated. But I think it is happening and it's going to happen. You can see it in the real industry leaders like Patagonia or Eileen Fisher, who are really sort of doing the R&D on repair, the renewal workshop. So those are the kinds of moves that I think will make it not too far in the future more possible to fix my toaster, because they will build incentives in to get parts available and to get manuals out. The second object for this section on care for it is really a little more personal. I'm going to go get it because it's in the bedroom, and then I'll bring it out since the sound's not good in here. Let me check the time too. Good. Okay, so this is a sling. This was both children's sling that I carried them in. Now, my children are big now, so they're not as cute anymore. So I thought I would use the sling to illustrate this concept of care. So about halfway through the repair shop process, I went to an exhibit at the Queen's Museum on the work of Mira Laderman-Ukeles. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with her work. She was an artist. She is an artist, went to Barnard. And the exhibit was a retrospective of a huge body of work that has to do with care. So she wrote in 1968 a manifesto called about how our society overvalues what she called development and devalues what she called maintenance. And she started scrubbing the steps of libraries and photographing it and washing sanitary napkins. And she writes about how she came to think so, one of the ways she came to think so deeply about this work of care was from having a child. She went on for many years to do amazing work. She orchestrated ballets of bulldozers. She shook hands with every sanitation worker in New York. Basically, she took the invisible and devalued work of care and made it visible and turned it into art. And I found this exhibit so moving because I also had small children, and I also realized when they were born that I too had not seen the value that care work and maintenance work was invisible to me. Or I thought it was unimportant. It was something other people did while while I should run around doing important things. Then of course, when you have a child, as I learned carrying them around in this sling for hours and hours and hours in the early wee hours, it's all maintenance work, right? That's all you're doing is you're cleaning clipping the nails and taking them to the doctor and feeding them and maintaining everything so that they can grow and do what they need to do. And I realized the incredible weight and value of this work, and then started realizing that our repair shops were care work as well, right? And when I saw Eucalis's exhibit, I had this realization of, oh my God, look how little we invest in care, whether it's by sort of not seeing the work of caregivers or by paying caregivers less. They earn on average $11 less than other workers. And care is usually work done by women and people of color. And what would it be like if we had an economy where we paid for it, where we valued it? It's one of the reasons, I didn't know this when I started the shop, but it's one of the reasons why I was very adamant that we would charge for our repair services. I think free things are great, repair cafes, buy nothing groups, but for me, in my experiment with this concept of care, I wanted to see how it fit in our economic system and how we paid for it. So the next object or series of objects is in here, and this step is called pass it on. So this is where we eat. And there's a nice bunch of objects in here. I think everything that you're seeing we got used. I got this from App Deco. I think I stole this. It was the centerpiece at a luncheon I went to. We made those shutter wall things from some shutters we got at Big Reuse. App Deco. I think this was the previous owner of our apartment left this when he moved. These were in my mom's closet, some old curtains she had that I stole from her. The chairs are App Deco. But the point of this sort of part of the conversation, let me switch back so you're looking at me and not a chair, an empty chair, is actually to talk about sometimes how hard it is to pass things on, right? If you want to close the loop, you have to pass things on. You have to buy used and you have to pass them on. Yes, convenience. And the question in a way is, how can we make it more convenient? How can we make it so that when I'm done with this dining table or these chairs, or I move to a smaller place or whatever, I can get it back into somebody else's hands? Or ideally, if that's not possible, have it be broken down into and the materials in it fed back into another system. This is sort of, the basic core of the circular economy. But when you think about it from a perspective of an actual person living in an actual home, it's a question of the barriers, the friction, and the logistics, right? That it's right now quite easy for me to order a new chair, let's say, and have it delivered to my home tomorrow. But if I wanted to get this chair into your home across town tomorrow, that's actually kind of a huge pain in the butt. And that friction, that barrier is what we need to work on. We can help as individuals by using those systems and putting the extra effort in. But for people who aren't going to do that, we also need to build the economic and the logistical systems to do that. So there are some amazing companies and organizations who are already working on this, players who've been around for a long time, like Goodwill, companies and organizations like Junk Luggers or Big Reuse, where I got those shutters, startups like ThreadUp and App Deco. All of these companies are working on building those systems of reverse logistics to make it as easy for me to get this table to you as it would be for you to get a new table. Or in fact, ideally, it should be easier, right? It should be much easier to get a table cross town than it is to get a table from overseas. But weirdly today, it's not. The next step will be for bigger businesses to start really tapping into this. It's in fact already happening. If you look at the big IKEA news this past fall about a global buyback program, it's really exciting. I guarantee you in 2013, when I was first starting my repair shops and writing my letters to Walmart, people laughed at me and they said, Walmart, IKEA, Target, they're never going to do this stuff. And it is happening. So those systems are starting to be built. We need smart policies to support them. A really simple one that I like to talk about is pay as you throw waste, right? Right now, if I put this table out on the street for trash, it doesn't cost me anything. Of course, it does cost me in my city taxes, but it doesn't, in the moment, it doesn't cost me anything. So it's very easy for me to do. So I have no incentive to take the extra effort to donate it or get it to somebody else, especially for objects that I can't, let's say I couldn't sell it because it's, nobody's going to buy it, but somebody might take it free. So pay as you throw waste is something that I really, really wish that we would see in the city very, very soon. So I'm going to go back to the table so that I can see your faces. And I think I'm going to switch to my other headphones. So give me a moment. You all can talk amongst yourselves. This will take just one sec.
First of all, thank you so much, Sandra. This was really fascinating, and thank you, Sandra. This was really fascinating. And
I just want to,
say again? No, I said thank you.
Oh, there's one more step in the process, and then I think did you say we have questions and comments? Is that where?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions, but go ahead.
So the last step, now there really are only the 5 steps from, adapted from Michael Pollan: have good stuff, not too much, mostly reclaimed, care for it, pass it on. But the last step, the conclusion of the book, has to do with this concept. It's called fight for it, of thinking about how we live in the world and how it connects to the bigger problems. So to think, well, you're not just like fixing your toaster because that's it. You're fixing your toaster by understanding how it's connected to questions of climate change, to questions of fair labor, to questions of international trade. And while on the one hand, that can feel a little overwhelming, there's an amazing anthropologist named Ian Hodder who has this theory called entanglement theory, where you sort of imagine us and all of our objects and all of the other objects and people all over the world as in this crazy giant web of entanglement. And I think it, yes, can be overwhelming, especially if you think, oh my God, I got a house full of stuff. Hodder says that modern humans, we have about 300 to 600,000 objects in our lives. It's a huge number and it's all entangled. But I think my one takeaway is that it shouldn't feel, and it doesn't have to feel like a burden, that that stuff is a blessing, it comes from the earth, and that with some simplicity and humility and understanding of the entanglement of our connection to other things and other people, we can actually do it better. So now, thank you guys for listening to my crazy tour and and being kind and not putting comments about the mess in my kids' room. Do we want to talk and do some questions?
Yes, we'll be happy to. I have to say that I was quite baffled by the chat because it doesn't actually have a lot of specific questions. It has more kind of like ideas that people had. So I'm trying to think how we can do it, but I think that I might just like ask the people who had the questions and comments to speak for themselves, because I think they can do it. Stefan, do you want to start? Because you actually had a few probing but important questions.
Yeah, I just had a question, Sandra, which was just as an observation coming from the UK. In Victorian Britain, we used to build things to last. In history, we've been there before. It's well known that all of our manufacturing, when it started in Britain, was about longevity. But of course, at the time, we weren't bothered about economic growth. It wasn't until the post-war period that economists in government started to make a big deal about economic growth. And I just wonder whether or not we need to get away from that paradigm if we're to really go big on a circular economy, and wondered what your thoughts were on that.
That's a really good question. I think it actually predates World War II. The real takeoff is after World War II, but if you look at the 20s and 30s, there's all of these signs, even as early as 1900 there, and into the 19th century, there's these signs of you see it building. But yes, you're right, after World War II, it's like, poof. And I think you're absolutely right. It's all about growth. So I think that there are, for me, there's two things to think about. One is, as you imply, can we begin to move away from our obsession with endless growth, right? Can we begin to not only value growth or to measure it in different ways? And then also, I think, and this part feels even easier and more achievable to me, is can we include, can we diversify what we're counting as growth? So right now, most businesses are really dependent on one revenue stream, which is extracting materials and manufacturing and selling new stuff. I mean, retailers and manufacturers, not service providers. If those companies, as IKEA is right now trying to do, can begin to diversify their revenue streams so that they are fueling their growth with reuse and with repair and with service, then we have a form of growth that's not so destructive and not so singularly defined.
Yeah, I'm minded to agree. I think we have to get off this obsession with growth, but that has to come from governments.
Well, I don't think we can wait for governments. I think this is one of the things is I think, yes, governments have a role to play. I think businesses do too. And I think individuals do too. This is a sort of philosophical discussion of like, who's, you know, I feel like a little bit with a lot of climate change, everybody's always like pointing to the organization or the entity to the left of them. Like, well, I can't do it because of them and I can't do it because of those. But I think every arm of the beast has some actions they can start taking right now. So for individuals, I think it's changing how you shop. For companies, I think it's beginning to diversify your revenue stream. And yes, governments have to start thinking about policies that will support both of those behaviors.
Cool. Thanks. Caroline, you have a question? Few?
Actually, Gal, can you ask it for me because the baby's sleeping?
No problem.
I think I see it. The clothing one?
Yeah.
Do you see a shift away from the pressure to look nice with new clothes and shoes and accessories in the post-COVID world? So I've been following sort of on and off through COVID, like the consumer spending numbers, like what is happening. It looks very chaotic to me. I still don't see yet, like, this is where we're landing. This is the trend. You know, there was the beginning where like nobody bought anything and then people started buying things again and it's different categories. And there's like, you know, those leisure wear companies that have gone through the roof as the only clothing companies that have done well in the COVID moment. I don't think we know yet fundamentally in clothing or in anything else what exactly the sort of what's going to stick from this COVID, like in terms of consumption patterns more broadly or clothing specifically. I don't know. Maybe others have thoughts of what's going to stick. Certainly while we're in it, I think people are not buying certain types of clothing. That the data is very clear on that. They're only buying squishy, soft, comfortable clothing.
Just an observation, Sandra, again from the UK, we reckon that 650,000 people will lose their jobs in retail, mostly in clothing, in the UK due to COVID.
Wow.
And we're not expecting it to come back.
Right, and that's so interesting. Like, what's going to fill that gap? Will it be, you know, will some circular economy practices fill in there? The UK is actually really well poised to do that. There, you know, it's interesting.
I think Sarah Harris, you wanted to say something. You raised your hand.
Yeah, hi everyone. I had a question about how have you found it effective to have conversations with people about not buying new stuff. Because I've tried to have conversations recently with, you know, I call it by nothing day, but Black Friday is just around the corner, and also with Christmas, and we're getting requests from like aunts and grandparents of like, what do you want? Like, nothing. We have everything. We have more than we need. I don't want anything. So I'm trying to get them like experience things, or what do you have that you don't need that we might like. But I find that, you know, I was having a conversation with my neighbor the other day about not buying new stuff and not supporting certain companies that are just massive, huge, that don't need us spending our hard-earned money there. But it ended up, I felt like she was starting to feel like shameful or feel guilty, and that's not where I wanted. It's not the effect I wanted to have. So I'm just curious what you find is effective in getting people to shift. Like, is it sharing stats? Is it like sharing stories, or what?
So I find what works is, this is going to sound silly, you guys. Okay, a couple of tactics, because I have faced this same thing, and the holidays is like a big problem in terms of like feeling inundated, feeling guilty, feeling pressure. It's so emotionally fraught that in some ways it's hard to do around the holidays, to be perfectly honest. It's just so emotional. It's hard to be like, I don't want anything. It's a little, some people here like, I don't want your expression of love. Not cool, right? So here's a bunch of like really specific tactics I have used. One is to sort of give people a specific list of things like that I do want. Like, I would love this after school activity for my kid that I can't really afford. I would love this, you know, experience together. I would love this, this exact link to this exact used item, you know, like, so that, to make people feel like, oh, I'm getting them something they actually want and need, and not make a big deal of like saying, I don't want anything new. I tried that for a while. As you said, people felt it didn't work for some people. And then more broadly, when I sort of talk up buying used, like especially to people who aren't interested or aren't into it, I actually stay away, or I only touch very lightly on the climate change sort of activism component, unfortunately. I feel like it turns people off, it makes them feel guilty. So I go for the oh my God, isn't this awesome route? Oh my God, look, I just got this, you know, I just checked out, look at this shirt on, look at this jacket I got for Eric on ThreadUp for 12 bucks or whatever. Oh my God, look at this new company where you can buy and sell this online, all used. Isn't this great? Like, to more just be like, isn't this awesome? As opposed to positioning it really strongly as like in opposition to something that's really bad, even though I think it is really bad. And I really, really do feel strongly about the sort of ethical and climate change reasons why I'm thinking about consumption. But for some audiences, it just doesn't work. It turns them off. They feel judged. So I just go for the positive. And sometimes the selfish thing, like, look, like for bargain hunters, be like, look, this is awesome and it's so cheap. Or for the, you know, you got to find what appeals to them. But I feel your pain.
I guess one question to sort of follow up with that from Caroline is, how do you justify when you do buy new stuff and not feel guilty about it? She's mentioned she struggled with the environmentalist guilt for decades, which can make it seem easier to just not care,
Yeah.
which she thinks many people typically do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you just have to forgive yourself, and nobody's perfect, and just accept that, like, you know, I just literally wrote a book about consumption and buying good stuff, and I'm supposed to be an expert at this. And like, you look in my kids' room, it is like neck deep in Legos that were most of them not bought used and are like made of plastic. But you know what? Like, you can't win every single battle. And like, I mean, I got some Legos used, but like, you know, especially like as Sarah pointed out, holidays and kids, like, you know, it's not, you do what you can and you like keep building and building and building. But like, I think that, you have to also give yourself some leeway and some latitude to know that nobody's perfect.
Sandra, I actually have a quick question. In terms of, people mentioned the idea of like charging for garbage, so you have to pay for every garbage bag and you can only use. I think what I struggle with is just because people have so many different lifestyle, and especially the problem with equity, people have just like different financial capabilities. How can you create something that's without creating a burden on the like poorest part of society? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I think that so what you're talking about is, and Jim Henderson is talking about pay as you throw, right? I think it's really important to realize that when you talk about pay as you throw, it's not a question of increasing costs, it's shifting the moment when the cost is felt or perceived, right? So we all pay for trash removal, but we pay in our city taxes. So that I'm paying in April. So the amount that I pay has absolutely no correlation to the action of throwing something out. So I might pay the same amount at the end of the year. I don't know how much it is, $100, $300. I can pay it all at the end of the year, or I can pay as I go, and therefore be incentivized to reduce my load. So I think that there are ways that, especially for pay as you throw, it's not about increasing the cost for any individual. It's about shifting the moment in time when they pay those costs. And actually, in terms of lower income individuals, there can be ways to address those costs as you go as well. For example, different rates, you know what I mean? Like we don't all have the same tax rate. We don't necessarily all have to have the same pay as you throw rate. So I think that pay as you throw is actually a good example of a policy that can be applied with considerations of equity and income differences built in. Some people have also raised this question to me very fairly of saying, hey, buy good stuff. When you do buy new, I'm sort of saying that you should be buying high quality goods, and those are often pricier. And that is actually true. And that one's less easy to kind of find a good solution for in terms of new stuff. Because all the prices right now are so artificially low, right? Because of the low wages and because of the externalities. But my answer to that in terms of sort of thinking about new goods as being pricier is to think we're also, when we think about a circular economy model, we're also introducing other ways to acquire goods, high quality goods, right? So I'm not saying everything needs to be more expensive because it's all going to be ethically sourced. We're also turning up the volume on reuse, which is a way for people at all income levels to have access to higher quality goods and repair and service. So I think it's really important to think about these questions of equity and access, but not to shy away from these solutions and think that they're impossible. Just like any kind of policy, they need to be thought through really carefully, and they can be done in a way that takes into account the different needs of different people.
Thank
Tiered
you.
rates.
Exactly. There was a question from Serene, just to repeat some of the names of the stores and places that for reclaimed furniture. I think we can also send an email with some of this information, so it's easier to access. But if you want to just like repeat a few of the.
Well, I can think about the ones like in my apartment that I'm like looking around that I use a lot. So for clothing, I literally go to like Goodwill or Unique or like the physical store because I like to look through the rack, right? I also use ThredUp once in a while for the kids. I don't use it for myself because I like to try things on. For furniture, the best in New York is Apt Deco, APT Deco, because they do delivery. So like if you're selling your table or buying your table, you don't have to rent a van. Junk Luggers does removal. Big Reuse are they in Brooklyn now or Queens? Big Reuse is a wonderful place. Art Cube is an amazing exchange resource specifically for theater and film artists. I think you're right, Gal. We should put this into an email. It's too many names for people to remember.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? I
Sure.
think I can. You
Hey,
can go
Gal.
ahead and just speak.
Hi, Sandra. Quick question. There's probably no good answer, but in your view, which is less bad for the environment, for containers, for food and things? Is glass better or is plastic better for the environment? Because glass lasts for thousands of years, but has less carbon footprint during production. Plastic only lasts, 400 to 500 years, but leaches toxins and kills ocean life and etc. So I feel like, you need containers generally for food and perishables, but I feel like it's almost like a philosophical dilemma that I have when I'm thinking of, I definitely reuse the stuff I have and I don't buy new things, but
Right.
which side should I lean more towards? Do you have any thoughts?
I have an opinion. It's not quite, I want to just caveat that it's not quite backed up with enough science. Like, I've read some of the stuff, but I don't feel like deeply expert enough on this, but I go for glass as much as possible. Glass is recyclable. So is some plastic, but as we all know, the recycling rates globally are pretty bad for plastic. So I tend to go for glass or recyclable metal containers for things when I can. Or I keep the thing from the deli and use that forever,
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Sandra. I have or is it Sandra or Sandra? Sorry, I'm not sure.
Like sand on the beach.
Sandra. The baby's awake now. I was looking at your LinkedIn and realized you're a set and costume designer. Do you find, I've wondered about this before watching theater or movies, is it a very wasteful industry, do you find, or do the things that are made for productions tend to get used later? Do they get another life?
Oh my God, this is such a big topic. Don't get me started, but both. Theater, film, television, very wasteful, right? The short answer is yes. We build scenery, we put it on stage for 6 days or 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years if you're super lucky on Broadway, and then largely gets thrown away. At the same time, theater especially has some really fascinating, really deep, circular economy roots of frugality and reuse, going literally back to the Greeks, the periaktoi, which would spin and get painted over and over again. So part of actually my work in theater is trying to talk with fellow theater artists about this, and same thing as here is saying, how can we turn up the dial on those practices and actually value them, and use them to sort of solve some problems off stage. So for example, theaters have, a regional theater will have a prop shop and a furniture stock, a big warehouse full of items that get used over and over and over and over again. It's like an awesome circular economy resource. What we need to do in theater is start to realize that those practices need to become the first stop. They need to be prioritized, and we need to have limits on the other practices. So right now, when you're in theater, you're often you're like, here's the fabulous stark ghost chair that we want, and you only go to the warehouse when you're told that you don't have the budget for those fabulous chairs, right? And then you're like, oh well, we got those ones from stock. No, we have to think about it completely differently and be like, what we have in stock is like gold, and it's so much more valuable because it's going to mean that we're going to be able to create our art in a way that is in alignment with our values, right? And that is what we care about most as artists, not whether we have the best stark chair. And it means that then you see those old shabby chairs that have gotten, kicked on and kicked to the back of the dusty thing. It's kind of like seeing the value in maintenance work again.
Yeah. It reminds me of something you said earlier. It's like making vintage cool, right? That there's history and more meaning in using something that has a past life than a new object.
And seeing, even though new things are wonderful, seeing something that's new and really compromised as totally uncool, as kind of gross, right? That's where the real ick factor should be. This item that was made by somebody who was separated from her child so that she could work in this really shitty factory, that is an ick factor, not somebody else wore this before. I see some chat about independent bookstores. The book in New York is at Word Up Books. community bookstore in Brooklyn and Book Culture for sure. And I don't know about what other independent ones, but the independent bookstores can order it for you and they get it quickly. So you don't have to go to Amazon. And I love the idea someone said about sharing a copy around. I think that is perfectly in the ethos.
Yeah, I was just thinking of maybe getting a copy to the local library. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Or I gave one to someone in my building was like, I want a book. And so I gave one to one neighbor and they're supposed to pass it on.
Just a comment about the ick factor. I once had an idea actually in business school with Gall and some of the others on the call. Our project was like reusable water bottles, like vending machines where you could buy like a glass or some type of plastic reusable bottle, drink, return it, it goes back, you get a deposit, whatever. Obviously, I never started that business, but comments that I would get were things like, you know, people, or even like a shop where you could return your shampoo bottles and get them refilled or whatever. And I got comments about like, oh, people wouldn't want used bottles, they want everything new. And I was like, why doesn't anybody say that about restaurants when they go and they use forks and knives and plates? Like nobody gets grossed out by that, or maybe some OCD people do, but most people think that's normal, but then we don't think of it when shopping for other things.
Yeah, totally. It's a weird psychological thing that like, exactly, like you will eat from a fork in a restaurant, so.
You wouldn't wear clothes that someone wore, yeah.
Right. COVID is complicating these things even further. You know, there's all kinds of like food service stuff going on right now where some of it is legitimately like for safety and some of it is like over unnecessary kind of single-use service. Elise?
Liza, wasn't there someone in the last forum that did that same thing, that was like a refillable bottle thing?
Was it Loop?
I think it was maybe Loop.
Loop is amazing.
Yeah, Loop does do that, and Sarah has mentioned it, but in the last forum, no, not the one on circular economy was not on a product. Algramo is actually a new, they're launching 2 test sites, 3 actually, and they have a bottle with an RFID tag, and you can reuse the container and get it's mostly detergent, some bleach cleaning solutions, so household cleaning supplies. And I think they're going to eventually expand into dry goods. So that's something to look out for. Algramo. Yes, Sarah has it.
Yeah, I have to relook at the video. I think it's there on our YouTube channel. I'll share it. And
Are these New York companies or nationwide?
Algramo is Chile based, and they just started their US locations in New York City.
Okay.
So you can look that up, yes.
Did Elise have something?
Hi, nice to see you again. I was just gonna share, I'm currently a student at the College of Worcester, and one thing that really irks me about this COVID is the amount of waste that we've created because of we're using a lot of plastic and disposable cups and to-go containers because we're not allowed to eat in the dining hall. And it makes me think of this. These are little carabiners that we use. And so if it's green, that means you can use a reusable to-go container and you just drop them off. You don't have to clean them. And then if it's yellow, then you can get a mug. And it's our little Hooked on Sustainability initiative. And I miss that. And it really irks me because when we are allowed to eat in the dining hall, we'll use plates and silverware and things like that. So I don't quite understand where we can't use our mugs and our to-go containers.
Yep. COVID complications, indeed. It's interesting, all of these startups. One of the challenges I see for all of these, I love these companies. There was a great one called Vessel for a while that was doing coffee cups. It was like City Bike for coffee mugs, which is such a great idea. So you go to, you would like go into the coffee shop, get your mug, RFID tag, and then you could put it in a drop box so you don't have to bring your own mug, which everybody forgets to do. And I think part of the challenge there is introducing these ideas and then also making it the default, right? Because all of these alternative things, whether it's bringing your own mug or anything, the problem is that this default is so built in. And how do you like build a dining hall or a coffee shop where it's just, the default is the reusable or the loop or this and that. That's what's really exciting when I see businesses that are starting to make that the default. I did not get a response from Walmart yet, Stefan, but I expect it at any moment.
Good luck.
But I don't need a response from Walmart because they're watching IKEA, right? Every big company in the world is watching what IKEA is doing right now and hatching their own plans, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to say something about IKEA or ask if you know more. So I promoted IKEA, an article that I read in Eddy about IKEA's take back program, and like 1,000 people viewed it. But then I'm in a circular economy course at the UC Berkeley Extension, and the professor was like, well, did you look into it? Like, what's the contract? And it's actually really, really limited. It's really only the kind of furniture that is already kept in circulation because it's a really good quality. They're not currently doing repair, refurbishing, or recycling. I hope that they get there, and they probably have intentions to go there. But currently, the take back program is really like less than what is currently going on with like Craigslist and eBay.
Totally, like it's absolutely. And so when I wrote the book, it was before the buyback program, and basically the whole chapter on IKEA is like that, where I'm like, they're talking the talk, they're not quite walking the walk yet, but I'm still hopeful because I feel like they've been working on it and piloting programs and testing it, and I think that they're laying the groundwork and they're starting really easy. But I think they do have to start somewhere. I mean, the companies that are really out there sort of, for example, REI's used gear site is much more kind of what I would call the real deal. Do you know what I mean? Like truly an item that was owned by another human and used. But I right now I'm feeling hopeful about that IKEA program that they'll get there. Maybe I'm just optimistic.
I noticed, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I noticed the other day at Target, they have the like baby car seat take back or like return program where you get a discount on something new if you return it. Do you have any idea what they do with those car seats? Like, do they get recycled, or is it just to get people to buy new stuff?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that program, so I don't know. But generally, programs like that don't impress me that much. Like in general, just because I'm like, I want to see somebody developing a revenue stream from something used. And so they're like, bring me your old thing and then go buy a new one. It's just like a kind of, it's a form of recycling that doesn't feel really, it's not working on the core business model. So I'm never like, woohoo. Also just as a customer, it feels like a kind of like, I'm glad, right? Maybe they can take that car seat apart, in which case that would be amazing if they can reclaim those materials. So that's why I can't truly criticize that program. But generally what gets me excited is when I see people really looking at it, at how do I get this into my business model in a really serious way? Not how do I provide a sort of recycling service for my customers?
As we hit 8 o'clock now, if there aren't any additional questions, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I would also like to throw out there that next week on Wednesday, we're having a monthly forum, and forums will be presenting about ventilation, air sealing, and multifamily buildings and how COVID impacts that. which I can share the event link in the chat. And thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you, Kistana, and thank you all so much for talking and visiting.